Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a story you probably won't survive without clutching your seat a little tighter. You know that eerie feeling when something that has always been yours suddenly feels foreign, as though someone rearranged the very air inside your own home. Well, that's what happened to me on an ordinary morning that turned extraordinary in the most humiliating way. My kitchen. The place where I've cooked for decades, where Sunday stews and birthday cakes carried my family through every season, was no longer mine. The door was locked. The key that once fit smooth and familiar refused to turn. The sound of metal grinding uselessly in the lock still echoes in my ears as I say this to you. And the smell of coffee, my coffee drifting from inside, brewed by someone else, only twisted the knife further. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to watch the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. Tell me where you're watching from. I love knowing the corners of the world these stories travel to. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's comfortably embark on tonight's journey. I stand there at dawn barefoot, housecoat, brushing the floor, trying to make sense of how the center of my household has been barricaded against me. People think family drama always erupts in loud shouts, slammed doors, or the dramatic crack of a plate against the floor. But the truth, it seeps in silently like water under a doorframe. And when you finally notice, the damage is already spreading. The first laugh that morning wasn't mine. It floated from inside, soft but sharp, my daughter-in-law's voice, carrying that thin edge I'd learned to fear. A laugh is a small thing, right? But psychologists often say the cruelest form of power isn't a scream. It's laughter that excludes. Families who study generational roles note that kitchens are symbolic battlegrounds. Whoever controls the kitchen often controls the rhythm of the family itself. It's not just about food, it's about authority who decides when and how everyone eats. People still debate whether this symbolism holds weight in modern households, but believe me, when you've been locked out of your own kitchen, you don't need a debate. You feel the truth like hunger itself. I knocked gently, trying to disguise the urgency with politeness. No answer. I knocked again, firmer this time. Finally, the door creaked open just enough for her face to slip through, that sly smile curving her lips. "Oh," she said, almost as if I were an intruder. "We didn't think you'd be up so early." "We." That word rattled me more than the lock. We. As if she and my own son had drawn a boundary around me, keeping me on the outside. I stepped inside at last, the air heavy with frying eggs and fresh toast. It should have been comforting, but it wasn't. The plates were already set, and her back was turned as if I were invisible. My son sat at the table, scrolling on his phone, not even looking up. I cleared my throat, hoping the sound would reassert my presence. Instead, she slid a plate onto the table in front of him, then another for herself. Mine never came. You know, in sociology classes, they say modern families are slowly drifting away from ritual meals, each member eating at different times alone with their screens. But there's something more insidious when that drift becomes intentional exclusion. It wasn't about schedules or convenience. It was about removing me from the equation. People still debate whether families today undervalue elders, but I don't think there's any debate. That morning, I was treated like furniture, just there, not part of the feast, not part of the laughter. And I noticed something else, the key ring dangling on the counter. A new brass key had been added, shiny and smug. She didn't even bother hiding it. That's the thing about control. Once someone thinks they have it, they like to display it. I reached for it instinctively, but my son shifted, placing his hand over the keys. No words, just that subtle move, protective and territorial, like a child covering candy from another child. Do you see the irony? This was the same son I once held up at 2 a.m, rocking him through fevers, whispering songs I don't even remember now, because they belonged to that sacred exhaustion of motherhood. And here he was, covering keys, guarding them as if I were some unwanted guest. People still debate whether grown children owe loyalty to their parents or to their spouses first. Let me tell you, it doesn't feel like a debate when you're the one left outside the door. I excused myself quietly. Dignity is a strange armor. It looks solid, but it cracks under the smallest pressure. Upstairs, I paced the hallway, each step echoing. That morning wasn't just about the kitchen. It was about the realization that the lines in our family had been redrawn, and I was on the losing side. Have you ever had that moment where the world shifts, but no one announces it? Like the furniture of loyalty has been moved around in the dark and you're left stumbling into edges you didn't know were there. I'll admit, one darkly comic thought crossed my mind as I wandered back to my room. Maybe I should start charging rent for my own stove. That's joke number 1 for you tonight, because even in Betrayal, humor slips in like an uninvited guest. It's the only way some of us survive. But laughter didn't fix the twisting in my gut. It didn't silence the whisper in my mind. If they could lock me out of the kitchen, what else could they lock me out of? My accounts, my memories, my legacy. I had always kept a small stash of savings tucked in the most ordinary of places. The flour tin, the old biscuit box, no one ever touched. And in that moment, standing outside my own kitchen, I realized I'd have to check. Because control over food is one thing, but control over money, that's power at its sharpest edge. And maybe you're shaking your head right now, wondering how something as small as a locked door could spiral into a full-blown crisis. But let me remind you, power doesn't arrive with drums and trumpets. It sneaks in at dawn on the hinge of a door you once thought belonged to you. That was the morning I learned my daughter-in-law wasn't just playing house. She was laying claim. So when I say this story is about betrayal, understand it started with a lock. And locks, my friends, always lead to keys. After that morning of humiliation, I couldn't shake the thought of my secret savings. For years, I had squirreled away small bills, birthday gifts, odd change from grocery money, even little bonuses I gave myself when I managed to stretch a meal further than expected. It wasn't much compared to retirement accounts or the house itself, but it was mine. My dignity fund, my emergency shield, my whispered reminder that I wasn't entirely dependent. And I had chosen the most unglamorous of hiding places inside a flour tin and a battered biscuit box, the kind no one under 40 even recognizes anymore. So when I finally worked up the nerve, I padded down the hallway, waited until I heard the sound of the television upstairs, and slipped into the kitchen. The smell of lavender polish still clung to the counters. The window was cracked, and a faint breeze rattled the curtains like a sly laugh. My hands trembled as I reached for the cabinet where I always kept those old tins. And when I pulled them down light as feathers, I knew. Before even lifting the lid, before sifting through the powder, I knew. The weight was gone. The flour tin was clean, too clean. Not a trace of the folded bills that used to be tucked beneath a plastic liner. My biscuit box was hollow, as if mocking me, its lid squeaking in complaint. Someone had been here, and the only ones with access were my son and his wife. Family experts say financial secrecy between generations is common. Elderly parents hiding cash, children demanding transparency, everyone distrusting everyone else. But here's the twist: people still debate whether hiding savings is wise or paranoid. Some say it breeds division, others insist it's survival. I'll tell you now, survival doesn't care about debates. It cares about that pit in your stomach when you realize your private defense has vanished. I gripped the counter and let out a sound I hadn't planned, a little gasp, too sharp, too loud. Almost immediately, I heard footsteps. Hers. Not hurried, not worried, slow, deliberate. The kind of steps that announce presence more than they cover distance. And then her voice, syrupy and sly, looking for something. I spun, my face hot, my palms dusted white with flour. There she stood in the doorway, arms crossed, smile small but triumphant. She didn't ask what I was holding. She didn't need to. That smile told me everything. Just baking, I muttered, lifting the tin half-heartedly as though that excuse could hide my trembling. She tilted her head, eyes flicking to the box in my other hand. Oh, those old things, I cleaned them out. Didn't want bugs, you know. We can't be too careful with the children around. Bugs. That's what my independence had been reduced to, a sanitation issue. I forced a laugh joke, number 2 of the evening, though it tasted bitter. Well, thank goodness you saved us from a flour beetle uprising. My voice cracked like stale bread, and she smirked as though my humor only confirmed her victory. Once she left, the silence pressed against me like a wall. I wanted to scream, but even my voice felt confiscated. It wasn't about the money itself, it was about what it meant. That little stash was the last corner of control I had carved out, and now it was gone, stripped away with the same casualness as wiping crumbs from a counter. I sank into a chair, clutching the empty tin. I remembered an article I once read about inheritance disputes, how families can turn vicious when money enters the picture, even tiny amounts. Judges, lawyers, cousins you haven't seen in years suddenly materialize like vultures circling a feast. The article had ended with a question: do families love each other, or do they just love what each other owns? People still debate the answer, but staring into that hollow biscuit box, I knew mine. The next days blurred. I became hyper-aware of every glance between them, every lowered voice when I entered the room. The way my son avoided my eyes was the worst. That boy once used to run into my arms, unashamed, with scraped knees and ridiculous stories about dragons in the yard. Now he couldn't even meet my gaze. It wasn't guilt that kept him silent, it was complicity. He had chosen her side. And maybe you think I'm exaggerating. Maybe you think it was just money, just small bills tucked in flour. But let me tell you something odd. In some rural traditions, mothers kept salt money hidden in kitchens, secret jars meant for survival during famine or widowhood. It wasn't greed, it was foresight. A woman who didn't keep her own salt money was considered reckless, naive, even dangerous to her household. The custom is old, forgotten by most, but my grandmother told me about it once, and I guess it stuck. My flour tin was my salt money, and it had been stolen. That night, I lay awake listening to the rhythmic snores of my husband beside me. He didn't know, or if he did, he didn't dare acknowledge it. In bed, in that heavy silence, I made myself laugh again, just to keep the tears from drowning me. Joke number 3. At least if the burglars come, they won't find anything worth stealing. But the joke turned into a sob halfway through, and I muffled it in my pillow. Here's the truth. No one likes to admit money isn't about bills or coins. It's about the respect it buys the choices, it protects the voice it gives you at the table. And now not only was I locked out of the kitchen, but I was also locked out of the future. But betrayal has a smell. You start to notice it on their clothes, in their laughter, even in the way the morning light hits their faces. And once you notice, you can't unsee it. So I resolved then, not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, like a seed pressing through soil, that I would find out where my savings went. Because if they thought I would simply bow my head and carry on, they had mistaken the woman who taught them to stand upright in the first place. When money disappears, silence fills its place, heavier than coins, sharper than paper. And in that silence, sometimes the youngest in the house notice things the rest pretend not to. That's how my granddaughter became the silent witness in this strange play, though she never meant to. She was just a child with wide eyes and a sharper sense of fairness than any adult in the room. One afternoon, I was folding laundry in the back room towels, smelling of detergent, warm from the dryer, when she crept in, her hair messy from play. Children don't enter rooms quietly unless they have something serious to share. She tugged at my sleeve and whispered, "Grandma, why do they have 2 keys?" Her voice was so small I almost missed it. 2 keys. I stopped folding the towel stiff in my hands. "What do you mean 2?" I asked, keeping my tone light, playful, even because children know when you panic. She nodded solemnly. "Daddy has one and Mommy has one, but they never put them on the hook. They hide them." I saw. It's funny, isn't it? Out of all the adults bustling through the house, it took a child to break the illusion. Psychologists often say children are the most honest mirrors, too young to know the value of lies, too sensitive to overlook dissonance. Families may lock out their elders, but they forget the little ones still have eyes. People still debate whether kids should be shielded from family conflicts, but in my case, she already knew more than anyone admitted. I brushed her hair back, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "Thank you for telling me," but inside my chest tightened. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was confirmed. They were keeping 2 separate keys, controlling the locks like prison wardens splitting shifts. My own son and his wife strategizing as if I were a trespasser in the home I had built. Later that day, I tested her observation. I watched my daughter-in-law as she carried groceries in, jangling her bag a little too deliberately, the metallic sound of keys dancing at the bottom. She caught me staring and smiled that same thin smile, closing her hand over the bag. Confirmation enough. Dinner that night was unbearable. They laughed over some TV show, my husband chuckling absent-mindedly, though I knew he hadn't caught the joke. I sat quietly spooning soup that tasted like water. My granddaughter caught my eye across the table, her lips pressed tight in imitation of the silence I was forced to swallow. And for a brief moment, I felt less alone. Odd facts always surface in my mind when I feel cornered. Did you know in certain inheritance laws, possession of household keys can actually symbolize control of property? I once read that in old European customs, handing someone the keys to the pantry or front door was as binding as signing over land. Strange, isn't it? People still debate whether those rituals should hold weight today, but maybe families instinctively understand the symbolism even without the law. Whoever holds the keys holds the power, and I no longer held any. That night, my granddaughter slipped me a drawing. She had sketched a house with a big door, and next to it, 3 figures. A small one was holding a giant key. Underneath, in shaky letters, she'd written, "This is you, Grandma. Don't forget." My throat burned when I saw it. Out of crayons and childish lines, she had handed me dignity I thought I'd lost. Still, I knew better than to lean too much on her awareness. Children are witnesses. Yes, but they're also fragile. I couldn't drag her into a battlefield she didn't choose. I folded the drawing and tucked it inside my recipe book, the same book my daughter-in-law never touched, the one with grease stains from decades of real cooking. It became my secret reminder someone still saw me. But secrets have a way of spilling, don't they? The next morning, as I poured tea, I heard hushed voices from the hallway. My daughter-in-law's tone was sharp, her whisper slicing through walls. She knows. The old woman knows. And then my son's reply, low and tired, "Keep it down. She won't do anything. She won't do anything." Those words landed heavier than the locked door. Not she can't. Not she doesn't know. But she won't. As though I had already been dismissed, stripped of agency, left to fade quietly in a corner. It was a judgment, a verdict without trial. And yet, in their careless confidence, they revealed themselves. If they believed I wouldn't act, then perhaps that was my greatest weapon. People still debate whether silence is strength or weakness. In that moment, I decided to let them believe in my weakness, to let them underestimate me, because underestimated women have always been the ones who rewrite endings. There's a strange comfort in knowing you've been written off. It frees you. I smiled to myself, a real smile this time, as I stirred my tea. My granddaughter's drawing peeked from my recipe book, a reminder that innocence sometimes sees more clearly than experience. And here's the odd joke that bubbled up right then. Joke number 4 for you tonight. If they're hiding keys, I'll just hide spoons. Let's see who really starves first. Ridiculous, I know, but humor is the crack that lets hope breathe. The house was no longer mine. My savings were gone. The keys jingled in someone else's pocket. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. Because when a silent witness plants a seed of truth in your heart, you either let it rot or you let it grow. And I was ready to grow something sharp. Something strong, something they'd never see coming. Word count 1078. Dinner is supposed to be the one time of day when families pause, breathe, and recognize each other. At least that's what the experts in family dynamics always say. Shared meals lower stress, strengthen bonds, even improve children's academic performance. But what those glossy articles don't tell you is how devastating dinner becomes when it's used as a stage for humiliation. And that night, I learned just how sharp the edge of a dinner table could be. The smell of roasted chicken filled the house, a smell that once would have been mine to control, seasoned with my hands, adjusted with my taste. Now it came from her oven, her timing, her authority. I shuffled into the dining room, my back aching from the weight of years, but also from the invisible pressure of being unwanted in my own home. My granddaughter sat quietly at the corner, crayons tucked away, her gaze flitting between me and her parents. She knew this wasn't going to be a kind evening. I took my usual chair, the one at the far end of the table, but something was different. My plate wasn't there. The table was neatly set, silverware, gleaming glasses catching the light, but in front of me there was only a bare placemat. No plate, no fork, nothing. You may think this was a simple oversight, a mistake, but I knew better. I've run enough dinners to know when something is deliberate. And the pause that followed, the way my daughter-in-law pretended not to notice, made it clear. She served my husband first, then my son, then herself, all with exaggerated care. Each dish was passed around as though choreographed. And then silence. I cleared my throat. "Excuse me," I said, lightly forcing a smile. "I think we're missing one." She turned, spoon still in hand, eyebrows raised. "Oh, did you want some too?" The room went still. My son looked down at his plate, fiddling with his fork. My husband shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. That's the cruel thing about humiliation. It isn't always loud. Sometimes it comes in polite words and questions that carry daggers. "Did you want some too?" In my own house, at my own table. People still debate whether disrespect to elders in modern families is intentional or simply careless. But when you're the one sitting without a plate watching others eat, it doesn't feel like debate. It feels like verdict. She placed a small plate in front of me, not with generosity, but like someone tossing scraps to a dog. The portion was tiny, barely a sliver of chicken, a spoonful of potatoes. I smiled again because sometimes dignity means pretending you don't notice. But my granddaughter noticed. She watched the plate land in front of me, her little jaw tightening. I tried to eat slowly as though I didn't care, but every bite tasted like chalk. My husband attempted small talk about the weather, the kind of bland filler that means nothing. My son nodded without lifting his eyes. My daughter-in-law laughed at her own jokes, her voice high and grating. And then came the real cruelty. She leaned across the table, eyes bright, and said, "Mother, I think it's time you let us handle the meals. You've done enough, don't you think? You should rest." On the surface, it sounded kind. To an outsider, it would seem considerate. But the message underneath was sharp. I was no longer needed. My place at the stove, the role that had defined me for decades, had been stripped away. And worse, she wanted to make sure everyone knew it. My granddaughter's fork clattered to the table. She looked at me wide-eyed as if silently asking, "Why aren't you fighting back?" And in that moment, I wondered the same. Why was I sitting there swallowing humiliation with every bite? Here's an odd fact I remembered then. In some cultures, the eldest at the table must be served first as a sign of respect. In certain Asian households, starting a meal without the elder eating is considered deeply shameful. People still debate whether traditions like that matter today, but I can tell you they exist for a reason. They prevent exactly this, the quiet erasure of those who built the family in the first place. My plate emptied quickly. It didn't take long with so little on it. And as the conversation moved on without me, I thought of another joke, bitter but necessary. Joke number 5 for you tonight? Well, I guess dieting just got easier. Nothing like being starved by your own family. I smiled at my own thought, but it didn't taste sweet. After dinner, I stayed behind to gather the dishes. My daughter-in-law protested faintly, No, you sit, we've got this." But the way she said it was final, as if to remind me my role was officially retired. I collected only my own plate, rinsing it under cold water, staring at the emptiness where my place used to be. Later upstairs, I sat on the edge of my bed. I thought about how families evolve. Children grow, daughters-in-law arrive, roles shift. That's natural. But what's unnatural is the glee with which some people erase history. She wasn't just taking over chores. She was rewriting the story so that I had never mattered. And here's the truth no one likes to say out loud: humiliation sticks to your skin longer than any bruise. People still debate whether emotional cruelty counts as real abuse. But when you feel it in your chest, when you wake up at night tasting the bitterness of being erased, you know it counts. I glanced at the folded drawing from my granddaughter hidden in my recipe book, and I held on to that tiny reminder. At least one pair of eyes still saw me. At least one heart still knew the truth. But that night, lying in bed, I realized something chilling. If she could erase me at the dinner table in front of everyone without shame, then what else was she capable of erasing? The thought kept me awake, heart pounding in the dark. And I knew the humiliation was only the beginning. Humiliation has a way of sharpening the senses. After that dinner, my ears caught whispers I might have ignored before my eyes noticed details that once seemed ordinary. The air in the house felt heavier, each room carrying secrets like dust in sunlight. And secrets, I've learned, always leave trails. Sometimes it's a forgotten slip of paper. Sometimes it's a tone too sharp for casual conversation. And in this case, it was a ledger, an old notebook I stumbled upon when I wasn't even searching. It happened on a quiet afternoon. My daughter-in-law had gone out for errands, though the perfume lingering in the hall suggested otherwise, and my son was at work. The house was silent except for the faint scratching of crayons from my granddaughter in the next room. I decided to clean my shelves, mostly out of restlessness. When your dignity has been dented, order becomes a kind of rebellion. That's when I noticed it wedged behind my cookbooks, an old brown ledger frayed at the edges, its cover cracked like dry skin. It wasn't mine. I knew every stain and crease of my recipe journals, and this didn't belong. My fingers trembled as I pulled it free, the dust clinging like secrets reluctant to be revealed. I opened the cover, and my breath caught. Inside, written in my daughter-in-law's neat but hurried script, were lists, transactions, withdrawals deposits, even notations in the margins. At first, I thought it was just household expenses. groceries, utilities, things that might make sense. But then the entries grew stranger. Payments to people I didn't know, jewelry stores, transfers, marked with vague notes like urgent or settled. I flipped faster, my pulse racing. The numbers weren't small. Whatever savings I had hidden in those tins had been absorbed into this system, transformed into her handwriting, her arithmetic. And the oddest part, she had marked some entries with initials. Not mine, not my husband's. Other letters, unfamiliar and foreboding. Here's a fact for you: in many households, informal ledgers have caused as many inheritance disputes as formal wills. Judges have even treated these scribbles as binding evidence of intent. People still debate whether such records should carry legal weight, but in that moment, the weight they carried was emotional, and it pressed hard on my chest. I heard a creak behind me. My granddaughter stood in the doorway, her eyes curious. "What's that, Grandma?" she asked. I smiled, forcing calm. "Just an old book," I whispered, slipping it quickly between my recipe pages. She nodded, satisfied, and ran back to her crayons, but inside I was trembling. That night I studied the ledger in secret. My husband slept soundly beside me, his breaths steady, oblivious. I traced the ink with my finger, decoding the rhythm of her control. It wasn't just about taking money, it was about building her own power structure, one transaction at a time. And the most chilling entry was at the very back: property transfer draft prepared. The date was recent. Property transfer. My property. The rage that welled inside me was almost comical in its intensity. I laughed softly. "Joke number 6 for you tonight. Maybe I should start my own ledger and list theft, humiliation, betrayal as recurring expenses." But beneath the humor, my blood boiled. You might think I should have confronted her immediately. Waved the book in her face, demanded answers. But confrontation without strategy is just noise. And she thrived on making me look like noise. People still debate whether silence or confrontation is more powerful in family disputes. I decided to wait. To study, to let her think I was as harmless as she believed. The next morning, I carried the ledger with me into the kitchen, tucked discreetly under my apron. She bustled around, humming, pretending not to see me, but I saw the way her eyes flicked to my hands, scanning for evidence. She knew something was missing. She knew I had found it, and that fear in her glance, oh, that was sweeter than any revenge. My son, meanwhile, remained willfully blind. He laughed at her jokes, kissed her on the cheek, asked about dinner plans, never once wondering what shadows were crawling beneath their conversations. That's the tragedy of some sons. They choose peace at the cost of justice. They think silence is loyalty, when really it's surrender. Later, when she stepped out for groceries again, I tested the ledger further. I compared her notations with our household bills, and sure enough, things didn't line up. Money marked as utilities had been siphoned elsewhere. Jewelry receipts bore her name, not mine. Even a strange down payment for consulting services sat unexplained. Odd facts pop into my head in moments like this. Did you know that in Victorian England, women often kept private ledgers hidden in sewing baskets to protect themselves from spendthrift husbands? Those books became lifelines when marriages turned toxic. People still debate whether financial secrecy destroys trust or preserves independence. I knew where I stood. Without my own records, I would vanish from my own story. So I began my own ledger. Quietly in a notebook I had used for recipes, but no longer cooked from. I recorded her theft, her expenses, her cruelty, not in anger, but in clarity. Because if the day came when I needed proof, I would not be the one fumbling. And as I wrote, my granddaughter peeked in again, this time handing me a crayon. "For your book, Grandma," she said, grinning. I tucked it into the ledger, a secret symbol of resistance. That night I lay awake, the ledger hidden beneath my pillow. My husband stirred, mumbling in his sleep. I stared at the ceiling, thinking about power, about how it shifts quietly in families, not with shouts, but with whispers, not with violence, but with paper and ink. And I thought of another joke, because what else can you do in the darkness but laugh at the absurdity? Joke number 7. If she keeps writing everything down, maybe one day she'll accidentally leave me the list of her own mistakes. But even as I laughed, I knew the truth. This ledger was more than her weapon. It was mine now. And with it, I would carve a path back to my dignity. Marriage is supposed to be a bond, a partnership, a place where you can fall back when the rest of the world sharpens its knives. But sometimes the worst betrayal doesn't come from enemies or even from daughters-in-law. It comes from silence, the silence of the man who promised to stand beside you for life. That's the kind of silence that filled my husband's chair, his face bent toward a newspaper he barely read, his ears deaf to the storms inside his own house. I first realized his complicity during breakfast. The morning sun streamed in painting golden stripes across the table. My husband sat with his coffee flipping pages with exaggerated calm, while she stood at the counter humming frying eggs in the pan I had once claimed as mine. I cleared my throat, testing him. Strange, isn't it, how our kitchen has so many new rules these days? He shifted, coughed, and muttered, "Best not to stir trouble this early. Best not to stir trouble." That's when I knew. He knew about the keys, about the savings, about the ledger I had discovered. Maybe not every detail, but enough. And instead of speaking, instead of standing, he chose quiet complicity. Experts often say men of his generation were trained to avoid conflict, to keep peace at all costs. People still debate whether this makes them wise peacemakers or cowardly bystanders. Sitting there watching him sip coffee while my dignity dissolved, I knew where I stood. He wasn't neutral. He was protecting himself, not me. That night, when the house was dim and our granddaughter asleep, I asked him directly, "Do you know where my savings went?" My voice was calm, not accusing, but there was steel beneath it. He hesitated too long before answering. Finally, he sighed. "It's for the household. Better she manages it. She's younger. Smarter with money. Younger." Words meant to soothe, but they cut deep. This was the same man who once leaned on me for every bill, every calculation, who praised my thrift and discipline. Now, in the twilight of our marriage, he had handed over my sovereignty to another woman without even asking. My daughter-in-law had stolen, yes, but he had opened the door. Do you know an odd fact? In some inheritance disputes, spouses who knowingly allow financial abuse are considered complicit, legally responsible. Courts have argued over whether silence counts as consent. People still debate whether ignorance excuses betrayal. But sitting in that bed, I knew his silence was a choice not to protect me. I rolled away from him, staring at the wall. I remembered the years I spent washing his shirts, ironing them crisp, making sure he never walked into work with a single wrinkle. And now, when I was wrinkled with age, he left me exposed, unguarded. The irony almost made me laugh. Joke number 8 for tonight. At least he finally learned to iron out his conscience. Days stretched into weeks, his complicity becoming clearer each time I watched him avert his eyes. When she snapped at me for cluttering the kitchen, he busied himself with his shoelaces. When she dismissed my cooking as too salty, he laughed nervously, pretending it was a harmless joke. And when my son mirrored her tone, addressing me with casual disrespect, my husband only sighed, muttering, "Kids these days. Kids these days." As if my son were still a child, as if disrespect were just youthful rebellion. No, this wasn't kids these days. This was betrayal these days. One evening, I found him in the garage, fiddling with tools he hadn't touched in years. I asked him why he let her control everything. He didn't look up. "It's easier this way," he said quietly. "Keeps the house peaceful." Peaceful. For whom? Not for me. For them. For him. His peace was purchased with my humiliation. In that moment, I remembered something my grandmother used to say: a husband can be a wall or a window. A wall protects a window, lets everyone see through you. Mine had become a window, transparent, fragile, and wide open for anyone to look past me. But here's the strange twist: his complicity, though painful, also gave me clarity. If he had stood up for me, maybe I would have trusted him. Maybe I would have leaned on him, hoped for his rescue. But his silence forced me to realize the only rescue was mine to plan. That night, lying beside him, I thought of all the cultural debates about marriage, whether long unions thrive because of compromise or collapse because of it. People still argue whether keeping quiet keeps couples together. My opinion, silence doesn't bind love. It buries it alive. I turned my head and looked at him in the dim glow of the clock. He seemed small in that moment, smaller than I'd ever seen him, a man who had surrendered his authority not out of love, but out of fear of conflict. And something hardened inside me. I would no longer expect him to stand for me. I would stand for myself. Joke number 9 floated through my mind as I drifted towards sleep. Marriage vows should come with disclaimers, in sickness, in health, and in convenient silence. It made me chuckle softly, though the laugh dissolved quickly into a sigh. The next morning, as she bustled in the kitchen and my husband sat in his chair with the paper, I watched them both with new eyes. He wasn't my partner anymore. He was her accomplice, whether consciously or not. And that meant I was alone. But alone doesn't always mean powerless. Alone can mean sharper, stronger, quieter. And if my husband thought silence would save him, he had forgotten who raised the son who now mocked me. Silence has always been a mother's weapon too, and I knew how to wield it. The word inheritance is one of those heavy words that can split a family faster than any argument about chores, politics, or even love. You don't realize how fragile loyalty is until money and property enter the room. And I discovered just how sharp that word can be one afternoon when my daughter-in-law walked into the living room with a folder under her arm and a smile too rehearsed to be sincere. I was sitting in my chair by the window, the light spilling across my lap, knitting needles, clicking absently in my hands. She placed the folder on the coffee table with a gentle thud, like a dealer laying down cards in a game I hadn't agreed to play. "Mother," she said sweetly, "we've been talking. It's time to get your affairs in order. For safekeeping, for safekeeping." The phrase rang in my ears, sugar-coated poison. I didn't even reach for the folder. I just stared at her, waiting for the mask to slip. And sure enough, her smile tightened. "It's just paperwork," she continued. "You'll feel better knowing everything is settled." I opened the folder slowly, the paper crackling under my fingers. There it was, a draft property transfer. My house, my land, my name scratched out in favor of theirs. "Temporary," she said quickly, watching me read. "We just want to protect you. You never know what could happen with taxes with banks. We're doing this for you." It's funny, isn't it? Families always dress betrayal in the clothes of protection. Psychologists say adult children often rationalize taking control of assets as helping their parents. People still debate whether it's protection or theft. But staring at my name on those documents, I didn't need debate. I knew. I set the papers down. "Why now?" I asked, my voice calm, almost casual. She blinked, caught off guard by the question. "Because it's the right time," she replied. "And you should trust us." Trust. A word that once lived at the core of our family, now dangling like a broken ornament. I thought of my stolen savings, my locked kitchen, the ledger I had uncovered. And I almost laughed. Trust, joke number 10 for you tonight. If trust were currency, my family couldn't afford a cup of coffee. My husband entered the room then, his eyes darting to the folder, his expression guilty. He knew. Of course he knew. He sat quietly, avoiding my gaze, confirming his complicity once again. My son followed, sheepish, lingering in the doorway. He didn't speak either, but his silence was consent. "Just sign, Mother," she urged, sliding a pen across the table. "It will be easier for everyone." Easier. Another dangerous word. Easier for them, perhaps. Not for me. I picked up the pen, twirled it between my fingers, and set it back down. "I'll think about it," I said softly. Her jaw tightened, but she masked it quickly with a smile. "Of course," she replied too brightly. "Take your time. We're here for you." She gathered the folder and swept out of the room, her perfume trailing behind her like smoke. The silence afterward was suffocating. My husband cleared his throat but didn't speak. My son rubbed his hands together, nervous, as if he knew I saw through the charade. And I did. That document wasn't about safekeeping. It was about erasure. Later that night, I sat at my desk and stared at my recipe book, the one where my granddaughter's drawing was tucked and where I had started my secret ledger. I added a new entry, attempted property transfer, for safekeeping. I underlined the phrase twice, my hand steady. Evidence. Here's an odd fact I remembered then: in some legal systems, even a draft of a transfer, if signed under pressure, can be contested as undue influence. Entire court cases hinge on whether the elderly were coerced. People still debate how to prove coercion, but one thing is clear: paper can be as heavy as chains. And yet part of me felt strangely calm, because for the first time their strategy was visible, written out in black and white. No more whispers, no more locked doors, no more sly smiles. Their plan was on the table, and now I knew the shape of the battle. My granddaughter wandered in just then, rubbing her eyes. "Grandma, why are you writing so late?" she asked. I smiled, pulling her onto my lap. "Because sometimes, sweetheart, the truth needs to be written down before people forget it." She nodded, satisfied with that answer, and drifted back to bed. Out of the mouths of babes, innocence can carry more wisdom than any law book. I stayed up long after the house fell silent, staring at the pen they had offered me, and I thought of another bitter laugh joke number 11 for you tonight. Funny how they want me to sign everything away while my hand is still steady enough to write their betrayals down. The next morning, the folder reappeared on the table, this time with a little sticky note, just a reminder. Love, love. As though love were measured by how quickly you erase someone's name. But here's the thing about bargains, they require agreement. And I wasn't ready to make theirs, not yet. If they thought my silence meant surrender, they had forgotten something important. Silence can also mean strategy, and so I tucked the pen into my recipe book right next to the crayon my granddaughter had given me. Because one day when this story is told, it won't be their signatures that matter. It will be my record, my truth, my refusal. There are locks you can see and locks you can feel. By this point, I had already been locked out of my kitchen, locked away from my savings, and nearly locked into a legal trap with that property transfer. But nothing prepared me for the night I discovered the pantry once the very heart of my household barred against me. A pantry is not just shelves of flour and beans. It is history continuity, the place where jars line up like soldiers in a quiet war against hunger. In families like mine, whoever holds the pantry holds the family. It was a Tuesday evening, silent except for the creak of floorboards as I tiptoed past sleeping rooms. I wasn't hungry, at least not for food. What gnawed at me was the urge to reclaim a piece of what had been taken. I wanted to open that pantry door just to see my things, my jars of preserves, the tins I had labeled with dates in neat black marker. Proof that I had once fed this house with my own hands. Proof that I still belonged here. When I reached the pantry door, my fingers wrapped around the knob. It didn't turn. A lock clicked faintly under my hand. I froze. A locked pantry. Of all the small indignities, this was the one that broke something inside me. People still debate whether the decline of extended families has weakened respect for elders. They publish articles and host talk shows about modern independence versus traditional authority. But there is no debate when your pantry is locked. There is no theory. There is only the sting of being treated as a trespasser in the space you once commanded. I leaned against the door, my ear pressed to the wood. Silence. But the silence wasn't empty. It was thick like a barrier that carried laughter from earlier meals. I hadn't cooked conversations I hadn't joined. I pressed harder as if the grain of the wood could absorb my heartbeat. Odd facts surface at moments like these. Did you know that in medieval households, the pantry key was often worn around the matriarch's neck, a literal symbol of authority? Whoever carried the key controlled not just food, but the rhythm of the family's survival. And here I was, standing keyless in front of a door that had once opened at my touch. History inverted. Tradition mocked. So I did something reckless for a woman my age. I went to the drawer, pulled out a thin butter knife, and slid it gently into the lock. My hands trembled, not just from age, but from fear. What if they caught me? What if my son walked in and saw his mother crouched at a pantry door, like a thief? But the knife clicked against the tumblers, and suddenly the knob gave way. The door creaked open. The smell hit me first, dried herbs, onions hanging in braids, the faint sweetness of sugar. My eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering in, and what I saw stole my breath. The shelves weren't just stocked with food, they were lined with boxes, and neat sealed boxes marked with labels not in my handwriting but in hers. Receipts were pinned to the wall like trophies. My daughter-in-law had turned the pantry into a vault, not for the family, not for tradition, for herself. I stepped closer, scanning the labels. Designer brand names, electronics, even a slip that mentioned a deposit for consulting services. None of this belonged to the household. This wasn't about feeding a family. It was about building her private empire behind a locked door. I sank onto the stool by the wall, my hands shaking. My granddaughter's crayon drawing was still folded in my recipe book upstairs, reminding me of dignity. And here was the opposite proof of deceit. As I sat there, my mind wandered to inheritance disputes I had read about. Families torn apart not by strangers, but by what they hoarded against each other. Judges speak of undue influence, lawyers debate testamentary capacity. People still debate whether families fail because of money or whether money just exposes the failure. Staring at those shelves, I knew. Money doesn't create greed, it reveals it. I reached out to one of the jars I had made years ago, pickled cucumbers, the label faded. My own handwriting smudged. It sat on the top shelf, untouched. My mark in a room now filled with hers. I pressed my hand to the jar as if gripping my younger self, the one who once believed food and love were the same thing. That's when I heard it. A creak on the stairs. My heart jumped. I quickly shut the pantry door but didn't lock it, sliding the knife back into my pocket. My son's shadow stretched across the hallway. He stood there, half asleep, rubbing his eyes. "What are you doing up?" he mumbled. I forced a laugh. "Joke number 12 for you tonight, couldn't sleep. Thought I'd check if the flower was still holding secrets." He chuckled faintly, not catching the bitterness. "Go back to bed, Mother," he said, and shuffled off. I leaned against the wall, trembling with relief. He hadn't seen. He didn't know I had uncovered her vault. Not yet. The next morning, I watched her in the kitchen. She moved with the confidence of someone who believed everything was under control. The way she slid the keys into her pocket, the way she hummed as she stirred coffee. And for the first time, I realized her power wasn't absolute, because power built on secrets is fragile. Once exposed, it crumbles. Still, the pantry haunted me. That locked door was more than wood and brass. It was a statement, a wall between what was once mine and what she had claimed. I thought of my husband silent in his chair and of how his silence had become her ally. I thought of my son willfully blind, a boy who had once trusted me with every scraped knee, but now trusted her with every decision. And I thought of my granddaughter, the only one who noticed, the only one who slipped me crayons when I needed courage. Odd fact for you, in some rural customs, if an elder is denied access to the household pantry, it's considered a sign of dishonor so grave it warrants public apology. Imagine that whole communities once stood to defend a mother's right to her shelves. People still debate whether those customs are outdated. But I'll tell you this, no apology could erase the sting of being locked out of my own jars. That night, lying awake, I traced the cracks on the ceiling. I thought of my life, all the meals I had cooked, the jars I had filled, the hands I had fed. And now here I was, a stranger in my own pantry. I felt laughter bubbling in my chest, not kind laughter, but sharp, bitter laughter. Joke number 13, maybe I should start labeling myself. Expired best before dignity. It was cruel humor, but it was mine. Here's what I know now. Families think betrayal arrives with screaming matches, courtroom fights, or dramatic disinheritance. But sometimes betrayal is just a lock. A small, ordinary lock clicked shut by a hand that once reached for your food with gratitude. And once that lock is turned, the whole house changes shape. I decided then that I wouldn't confront her yet. Not until I knew the full extent of her plan. The pantry had shown me her vault. The ledger had shown me her system. The property transfer had shown me her ambition. Together, they painted a picture too big to ignore. And so I went back upstairs, slipped into bed, and stared at my sleeping husband. He would never protect me. My son would never choose me. But I had something they had forgotten. I still possessed the ability to wait, to watch, to gather proof. Because when the day came, and it would come, I would not knock on doors anymore. I would open them. And I would open them wide enough for the truth to walk straight in. Children hear everything. You think they're lost in their toys, buried in cartoons, or asleep in their beds, but their ears are sharper than any lock and their eyes wider than any keyhole. I had already seen it with my granddaughter, her quiet drawings, her whispers about hidden keys. But I didn't expect my grandson, older, bolder, and already caught between loyalty and curiosity, to be the one who dropped the heaviest truth into my lap. And when he did, I felt the whole floor tilt beneath me. It was a Sunday afternoon, and the house was buzzing with false cheer. My daughter-in-law had hosted one of her family lunches, the kind where she served dishes she never asked me to help prepare, and my son sat beside her as though they were king and queen of a kingdom I'd apparently abdicated. My husband, as usual, stayed quiet, hiding behind the safe refuge of his newspaper, the shield of silence he had chosen long ago. The children ran around, their laughter echoing down the hallway, and for a moment I let myself believe that maybe everything wasn't poisoned. Maybe innocence could still bloom in corners they hadn't yet claimed. But later, when the plates were cleared and the grown-ups slouched into the living room, my grandson tugged at my hand. His grip was tight, urgent. "Grandma," he whispered, "come upstairs. I need to tell you something." My heart fluttered. The last time a child had whispered to me, my granddaughter had revealed the truth about the keys, and now it was his turn. I followed him up the staircase, the carpet muffling our steps, the murmur of adult voices fading behind us. He shut his bedroom door, a dramatic slam that made me nervous. He looked at me with eyes too serious for his age. I heard them, he said. His voice was low, steady, like a secret already rehearsed. Mom and Dad, they were talking last night when they thought I was asleep. I sat on the edge of his bed, my hands folded tightly in my lap. What did you hear? I asked gently, though my pulse was racing. They said... He hesitated, chewing his lip. They said they have to erase you. That when the house is finally theirs, no one will remember you were ever in it. Erase. That word sliced deeper than any insult ever could. Not exclude, not silence, but erase. As if I were chalk on a board wiped away with one careless swipe. I felt dizzy, gripping the bedspread to steady myself. He watched me carefully, guilt flickering in his young eyes. I wasn't supposed to hear, he said. But they were arguing. Dad said it wasn't right. Mom told him not to be weak. She said if they don't push you out now, you'll take everything with you when you die. Death. The word landed heavy, though they didn't say it in mourning. They said it in strategy. That's the difference between family love and family betrayal. Love prepares for your passing with tenderness. Betrayal prepares for it, like a business deal. I drew him close, kissed the top of his head, and whispered, "Thank you for telling me." He nodded, his body tense. "Don't tell them I told you," he pleaded. "Promise." I promised, though, in my heart, I was already writing this moment into my secret ledger. Here's a fact about family dynamics. Children in households filled with conflict often become secret keepers, carrying burdens far heavier than their age deserves. Psychologists warn that these children learn to navigate tension by aligning with one side in silence. People still debate whether telling them the truth helps or hurts, but sometimes children don't choose to know. The truth chooses them. I left his room quietly, my steps careful on the stairs. Down below, laughter floated from the living room. My daughter-in-law's laugh, bright and sharp, cutting through the air like glass. My son's low chuckle forced. And I realized something: my grandson had seen more honesty in their argument than I had ever been offered in daylight. That evening, as I cleared the dishes alone, I thought about the word erase. Odd fact for you, in some cultures, names of the dead are spoken for generations, carved into wood, passed in song, because to forget a name is considered the true death. The body may die once, but the name dies again if memory fades. People still debate whether memory is the only immortality we have, but my daughter-in-law had made her position clear. She wanted me erased, my name forgotten, even while I still lived. I washed each plate slowly, the soap bubbles catching rainbow light as though they mocked me with their beauty. I thought of another bitter laugh joke, number 14. Maybe I should start signing all the dishes with a marker. At least then they can't erase me while they eat. The joke made me snort, and for a moment the absurdity of it all lightened the heaviness in my chest. Later that night, when the children were asleep and the house dim, I sat at my desk with my recipe book and ledger. I wrote down what my grandson had told me word for word. Not because I doubted him, but because truth written down cannot be erased as easily as whispers. The page trembled as I filled it. They planned to erase me. My husband stirred behind me, muttering in his sleep. I glanced at him, wondering if he truly didn't know, or if he knew and simply chose comfort over conscience. Either way, his silence was part of the erasure. And here's where the real fear struck me. Erasure isn't always dramatic. It doesn't always mean burning photographs or shredding letters. It can mean changing who sits at the head of the table, locking someone out of their pantry, keeping their plate empty, stealing their savings. Erasure can be slow, subtle, ordinary, and by the time you notice, it's already nearly complete. But the confession of a child can stop erasure in its tracks. My grandson's words echoed in my ears long after the night settled. His loyalty, however small, planted something inside me, proof that I had not vanished yet, proof that at least one young heart would remember me. The next morning, I tried to look at them, my son, my daughter-in-law, with neutral eyes, but I couldn't. Every word they spoke carried shadows now. Every laugh sounded rehearsed. And my grandson's face haunted me too, his little brow furrowed with a burden no child should carry. Odd fact: in ancient Rome, erasing someone from public record was called damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. Statues, smashed names, chiseled off walls. They thought destroying memory would destroy power. People still debate whether it worked. Looking at my family, I realized modern households can practice their own damnatio memoriae through silence, exclusion, and control. But I wasn't ready to be erased. Not yet. My grandson had given me a gift whether he knew it or not. His confession was a mirror reflecting the truth I had suspected but never confirmed. And once you see truth in a child's eyes, you cannot unsee it. I sat with that realization for hours, staring at the folded crayon drawing from my granddaughter, and now in my mind, the whispered confession of my grandson. 2 children, 2 witnesses. In a house of betrayal, they were my unexpected allies, and though I could not drag them into battle, their small acts of honesty reminded me that memory cannot be erased if even one voice carries it forward. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't laugh. I just breathed slowly, planning. Because if they thought they could erase me quietly, they had underestimated the woman who had written every recipe, every holiday menu, every bedtime story that filled this house long before their keys jingled in the locks. And here's my final joke for tonight, number 15. If they want to erase me, they better bring a bigger eraser because I write in ink. Long games are not played with shouting. They are played with silence, patience, and a steady hand that waits while others rush. I realized that was the only way forward. My daughter-in-law had her keys, her ledger, her locked pantry, her schemes of inheritance. My son had his silence, my husband, his complicity. But me, I had memory, I had observation, and I had the stubbornness of a woman who had spent a lifetime surviving in quiet rooms where no one thought she was listening. And when people underestimate you, that becomes your greatest weapon. After my grandson's confession, I stopped fighting their small humiliations directly. I let them believe they had won. I accepted the smaller portions at dinner, the exclusion from conversation, the patronizing tone that dripped from her voice when she called me mother, like a school teacher scolding a child. I played weak, and in that weakness, I found space to plan. Because power, I've learned, is not about volume. It's about control of narrative. Families always tell stories about themselves, who sacrificed, who built, who provided. And whoever controls those stories controls the legacy. People still debate whether family history is just memory or a weapon. But in my house, it was both. So I began to rewrite. Not openly. I didn't confront her ledger with rage. I didn't demand back my keys. Instead, I quietly created my own archive. In my recipe book, in margins of old calendars, in slips of paper tucked into the hems of curtains, I recorded everything. Dates when the pantry was locked, times when my plate was missing, amounts of money that vanished, even words spoken too quickly like erase and safekeeping. I became my own historian because one day history might be all that was left of me. Odd fact, in some rural traditions, women used embroidery as code. They stitched patterns into quilts and shawls that told stories of betrayal or survival, passing them down quietly through generations. To outsiders, they were just flowers or stars. To insiders, they were records of injustice. People still debate whether those codes were intentional or coincidence, but I like to think women have always found ways to hide truth in plain sight. My embroidery was ink and paper. My code was detail. My daughter-in-law didn't notice. Why would she? To her, I was already erased. She laughed louder. At dinner, spoke more boldly. Told my son what we had decided about bills, holidays, even renovations. She forgot that I was watching. And watching is its own form of resistance. One night, while they laughed in the living room, I walked into the pantry again, using the butter knife trick I had perfected. Inside, I didn't just glance, I documented. I copied down receipts, noted serial numbers, wrote descriptions of boxes. I even sketched a rough map of the shelves. It felt absurd, a grandmother scribbling like a spy in her own house. But absurdity doesn't erase truth. It preserves it. And then I did something that surprised even me. I started placing small things of mine in hidden corners, not money this time, but tokens. A hairpin inside a cereal box, a button from my blouse in the sugar jar, my presents scattered like seeds. Because if they wanted to erase me, they would have to erase me piece by piece, and I intended to be everywhere. Here's a fact about family inheritance courts often look for patterns of behavior to prove undue influence. A single event is dismissed as misunderstanding. A pattern becomes evidence. People still debate whether the law truly protects the vulnerable. But one thing is clear, patterns matter, so I built mine. Quietly, steadily, like a woman setting a trap not of steel, but of paper and memory. Meanwhile, my grandchildren remained my silent witnesses. My granddaughter kept slipping me drawings, houses, keys, sometimes just hearts. My grandson, though more cautious, gave me small updates. They said the bank will call soon. They said you're too tired to handle paperwork. His eyes were sad, but his loyalty was real. Children may not be able to fight battles for you, but they can keep your name alive in whispers. And maybe you're wondering, why not leave? Why not pack a bag, slam the door, and go somewhere I'm respected? But leaving isn't always victory. Sometimes leaving is exactly what they want. People still debate whether survival means escape or endurance. For me, survival meant staying. Staying in the house I had built even as they tried to write me out of it. One evening, as I sat at the table with my small plate, I felt an odd calm. She laughed. My son chuckled. My husband hid behind his newspaper. And I smiled, because while they thought they were writing me out, I was writing myself back in. Not loudly, not with confrontation, but with the kind of ink that seeps into history when no one notices. I thought of another joke number 16 for you tonight. Maybe I'll leave them the house in my will, along with a note that says, "Check the pantry for my ghost." The laugh bubbled up in my throat, quiet but real. Odd fact again, in some cultures, the matriarch's blessing is considered more binding than any legal document. A house may transfer hands, but if the mother refuses to bless it, people believe it carries bad luck. People still debate whether curses are real, but belief itself is power. And I, too, had power left, not legal perhaps, but emotional, symbolic, ancestral, the kind of power that lingers. So I played the long game. I let them see me. Shuffle. Slowly, speak softly, act small. I let them underestimate me every day, and all the while I built my archive, gathered my witnesses, planted my tokens. Because erasure only works when the erased stay silent. And I was silent, yes, but my silence was writing. My silence was remembering. Late at night, I whispered to myself, almost like prayer, "You will not erase me. Not while I breathe, not after." And each whisper stitched me back into the fabric of my house, into the air, into the walls. The long game is cruel because it requires patience. It means swallowing humiliation, smiling at betrayal, nodding when they dismiss you. It means waiting until the right moment to show your hand. But I had waited for children to grow, for marriages to form, for decades of family life to unfold. Patience had always been my gift. Now it was my weapon. And here's my last bitter laugh for tonight, joke number 17. They think they're writing the end of my story. But wait until they see the sequel. Because the long game, my friends, is not about surviving today. It's about making sure tomorrow remembers who you were, no matter how hard they try to erase you. And now, as the house settles into silence, I let myself breathe. The long game continues, but tonight we stop here together. The lights in the hallway are dim, the keys rest heavy in pockets, not mine, and yet the air still carries my name, even if they try to erase it. Memory clings to walls, to jars, to laughter that refuses to die. If you've listened this far, you've walked with me through locked kitchens, stolen savings, quiet complicity humiliations at the table, hidden ledgers, locked pantries, and the whispers of children who see more than they should. You've felt the weight of silence, the sting of erasure, the strange humor we cling to when nothing else will hold us up. And maybe you've wondered about your own family, your own battles of respect and memory. Here's the truth. Families are never just blood. They are stories passed or silenced, written down or erased. People still debate whether love is enough to hold them together, but love alone doesn't guard the doors. Patience, memory, and the courage to keep breathing, that is what holds us in place when others try to push us out. So as you sit there now, maybe in your room, maybe far from your own kitchen, remember this. You cannot always stop betrayal, but you can refuse to vanish. You can whisper your truth into the cracks of the house, into the ears of those who still see you, into the very air that surrounds your name. And that whisper will outlive locks, outlast ledgers, outshine the cruelest laugh. Thank you, my friends, for staying with me. Shout out to all my subscribers and channel supporters. You are the reason these stories breathe. Good night, wherever you are. Sleep gently, and don't let anyone erase you.